Picture this. It's 1386 in the French town of Falaise. A crowd gathers in the public square. The executioner stands ready on the scaffold. But the condemned criminal being led to the gallows isn't human. It's a pig. And not just any pig. This sow has been dressed in a human waistcoat complete with white gloves on her hooves and a human mask tied to her snout. She's about to be hanged for murder. And here's the part that'll mess with your head. This wasn't some barbaric mob justice. This was the law. The pig had a lawyer, she got a full trial, witnesses testified, the judge deliberated, and after careful legal consideration, the court sentenced her to death by hanging. If you lived in medieval Europe, this scene wouldn't even be the strangest thing you'd witness that week. Because medieval law wasn't just harsh, it was downright bizarre. We're talking about a legal system where your shoes could be illegal if they were 2 inches too long, where playing football was a criminal offence punishable by imprisonment, where rats could be summoned to court and officially excommunicated by the church. See, we think of medieval times as lawless and chaotic, but the opposite was true. Medieval Europe was drowning in laws. Every kingdom, every duchy, every tiny village had its own legal codes, and when you combine religious paranoia, class warfare, and a complete misunderstanding of how the world worked, you get some of the most insane legislation ever written. Today, I'm taking you through the 10 most bizarre medieval laws that actually existed, and I need to be clear about something up front. These aren't myths or exaggerations. Every single law I'm about to show you appears in actual medieval legal documents, court records, royal decrees, church edicts. The paper trail is all there. The sow executed in Falaise? We have the receipt for what they paid the executioner, 21 sous, about 3 times what a labourer made in a month, for executing a pig. Animal trials and executions. Let's start with those animal trials, because nothing captures medieval legal insanity quite like watching grown adults put a rooster on trial for witchcraft. Between the 12th and 16th centuries, European courts tried at least 85 animals that we know of, and those are just the ones with surviving records. The real number was probably in the hundreds. Pigs were the most common defendants. They had this nasty habit of wandering into houses and attacking children. But the courts didn't stop there. In 1474, a rooster in Basel was tried and burned at the stake. His crime? Laying an egg. See, medieval people believed that rooster eggs could hatch basilisks, those mythical serpents that could kill you with a glance. So when this rooster supposedly laid an egg, it wasn't just unnatural, it was demonic. But here's where it gets properly mental. These weren't kangaroo courts. The animals got full legal representation. In 1457, a sow and her 6 piglets were tried for murdering a 5-year-old boy in Burgundy. The court appointed a lawyer named Bartholomew Chasseneuil to defend them. This wasn't some joke appointment either. Chasseneuil was one of France's most respected jurists. He later became president of the Parliament of Provence, and Chasseneuil took the case seriously. When the piglets were charged as accomplices, he argued there was no evidence they'd participated in the killing. Just being present didn't make them guilty. The court agreed. The mother pig was hanged, but the piglets were acquitted due to their youth and the lack of direct evidence against them. Think about that for a second. A medieval French court actually debated the legal culpability of baby pigs. They considered whether the piglets had criminal intent, whether peer pressure from their mother influenced them. These were the kinds of legal questions keeping medieval lawyers up at night. The trials followed proper judicial procedure too. In 1519, some field mice in Stelvio, Italy, were charged with damaging crops. The court sent them a summons. When the mice failed to appear, shocking I know, their lawyer argued they couldn't attend because cats made the journey too dangerous. The judge accepted this argument and gave the mice safe passage. But the absolute peak of this insanity happened with insect trials. Weevils, locusts, caterpillars, all hauled before ecclesiastical courts. In 1478, the Bishop of Lausanne formally charged some beetles with destruction of property. The beetles were appointed defence counsel, who argued his clients were simply following their nature as given by God. The prosecution countered that the beetles were instruments of the devil. After lengthy theological debate, the court issued a compromise. The beetles would be allocated their own plot of land outside town where they could live unmolested. If they stayed there, fine. If they returned to the crops, they'd be excommunicated. Excommunicated? Beetles? The church actually had a whole procedure for this. They'd read the excommunication order aloud in the fields, commanding the insects to leave within 3 days or face eternal damnation. Sometimes they'd ring church bells to make sure the bugs heard the message. And here's the truly wild part. People thought it worked. Medieval chronicles are full of accounts where insect infestation supposedly ended after formal excommunication. Of course, what probably happened was the bugs just moved on naturally after eating everything, but correlation became causation in the medieval mind. The total ban on football. Now, you might think medieval sports would be encouraged, keeping the peasants entertained and all that, but medieval football was nothing like what we know today. Imagine 500 drunk men from 2 rival villages meeting in a field with a vague goal of getting a ball to the other village by any means necessary. No rules, no referee, no limit on players, just pure chaos. The ball itself was usually an inflated pig's bladder. The goals could be 3 miles apart, and the game could last from dawn to dusk. Players would punch, kick, stab, and occasionally murder each other. It was less sport, more organised riot. In 1314, King Edward II had enough. He issued this decree. For as much as there is great noise in the city caused by hustling over large balls from which many evils might arise which God forbid, we command and forbid on behalf of the king, on pain of imprisonment, such game to be used in the city in the future. Pain of imprisonment for playing football, and Edward wasn't alone. By 1365, King Edward III banned football along with handball, hockey, coursing and cockfighting. Not because he cared about public safety, mind you. He was worried about archery practice. See, England's military might depended on longbowmen. It took years to develop the strength and skill to use a warbow effectively. But instead of practicing archery on Sundays, young men were playing football, so Edward made it law. Sundays were for archery practice only. Get caught playing football, that's a fine. Keep doing it. Prison. The Scots went even further. In 1424, James I of Scotland's Parliament decreed, "It is statute, and the king forbiddeth that no man play at the football under the pain of 50 shillings. 50 shillings was about 2 months' wages for a labourer. France had its own version called La Soule, equally violent, equally banned. Philip V outlawed it in 1319. Philip VI rebanned it in 1331. Charles V banned it again in 1369. The fact they kept having to ban it tells you how well that worked. But here's my favourite part. We have court records of the actual football arrests. In 1481, 6 men in Halifax were prosecuted for playing football on Sunday. In 1572, a man named Gilbert Dawson was imprisoned in Manchester for organising a football match. Actual criminals, because they kicked a pig's bladder around a field. The bans created this whole underground football culture. People would organise secret games in remote fields. Lookouts would watch for sheriff's men. If you got caught, everyone would scatter into the woods. Some clever villagers found loopholes. The law banned football within city limits. Fine. They'd play just outside the boundary. The law specified Sundays. They'd play on Saturday night and claim it was still the Sabbath Eve. The Great Pointy Shoe Crisis. Medieval fashion police weren't metaphorical. They were real, they had legal authority, and they measured your shoes. By the 14th century, European nobility had developed an obsession with pointy shoes called poulaines. And when I say pointy, I mean the tips could extend 2 feet beyond your actual foot. Some were so long they had to be tied to your knees with chains to walk. Others were stuffed with moss and bent upward like elf shoes. The longer your shoe tips, the higher your status. By the 1380s, princes were wearing points so long they needed page boys to carry the tips when they walked upstairs. The church absolutely hated them. Priests thundered from pulpits that poulaines were Satan's footwear. Why? Because you couldn't kneel properly to pray with 2-foot-long shoe tips. Plus, they thought the extended tips were, let's say, anatomically suggestive. But the real problem was medical. In 2021, archaeologists studying medieval skeletons from Cambridge found that bunions increased by 2,700% during the poulaine craze. People were literally deforming their feet for fashion. The long shoes changed how people walked, causing them to lean back and mince along in tiny steps. Falls and injuries skyrocketed. Then came the breaking point. According to contemporary chronicles, so many knights at the Battle of Nicopolis in 1396 had to cut the tips off their shoes to run away that it contributed to the Christian defeat by the Ottomans. Imagine losing a crusade because your shoes were too pointy to retreat properly. By 1463, King Edward IV had seen enough. He passed one of history's most specific laws. No knight under the rank of lord, esquire, gentleman or other person shall wear any shoes or boots having pikes or points which exceed the length of 2 inches. 2 inches. The King of England literally set a legal maximum toe length. But Edward wasn't done. The law went into incredible detail. Lords and hire could wear points as long as they wanted. Merchants worth over £500, maximum 6 inches. Gentlemen, maximum 4 inches. Commoners, maximum 2 inches. Servants and peasants, no points at all. The Cordwainers Guild, the shoemakers, were made enforcers. Make shoes longer than allowed for someone's social class? That's a fine. Repeat offence? Lose your licence to make shoes. We have records of the shoe police in action. In London, officials would literally measure shoes in the street. In 1465, a merchant named Thomas Trivett was fined 20 shillings for wearing 14-inch points when his wealth only qualified him for 6 inches. The law spawned a black market in illegal shoes. Nobles would secretly commission extra-long pulaines from underground cobblers. There were shoe speakeasies where fashionable young men would gather to show off their illegal footwear. Some tried to game the system. The law said 2 inches beyond the foot. They'd claim they had enormous feet. Others argued the law meant 2 inches from the toe, not the whole foot, allowing for longer points if you curled them up. Trial by combat, husband versus wife edition. Medieval trial by combat was already insane, the idea that God would ensure the innocent party won in a fight to the death. But the Holy Roman Empire took this concept and made it weirder. Official judicial duels between husbands and wives. Obviously, a physical fight between a man and woman wasn't fair, so medieval German law came up with a solution that's somehow more bizarre than the problem. The man had to stand in a pit dug up to his waist. One arm was tied behind his back. He got a wooden club about 3 feet long. The woman stayed above ground, free to move, armed with a sling containing a rock weighing between 1 and 5 pounds. I need you to picture this. A medieval German court has dug a hole in the ground. A man is standing in it, waist deep, one arm tied back holding a stick. His wife is circling him with a weighted sling. Court officials are watching. A notary is taking notes. This is happening under the full authority of law. The combat rules were specific. If the man touched the edge of the pit, he lost. If the woman was pulled into the pit, she lost. The fight continued until one surrendered or couldn't continue, and the penalties for losing weren't equal. According to the 1276 Augsburg Law Code, if the woman lost, she was buried alive. If the man lost, he was hanged. The logic: a man who couldn't defeat a woman even with the pit handicap had shamed his gender so badly he deserved execution. We have illustrated fighting manuals showing the techniques. Hans Talhoffer's 1467 Fechtbuch shows detailed positions, how the woman should swing the sling to avoid the man's club, how the man should try to grab the sling to pull her in. These were actual combat techniques that people studied. The trials usually involved serious marital disputes, accusations of adultery, poisoning attempts, or violence. Regular divorce didn't exist, so sometimes attempted murder was literally easier than separation. One documented case from 1228 in Switzerland ended with the woman winning. She knocked her husband unconscious with the weighted sling, then strangled him with the cloth while he was down. The court declared her innocent of whatever she'd been accused of because God had clearly favoured her in combat. But here's the really dark part. We don't know if most of these combats actually happened or if they were just threatened. The existence of the law might have been enough to force settlements. Take this to trial by combat? Well, one of us dies, so maybe we should work this out. The sanctuary loophole. Medieval sanctuary law created one of history's most absurd legal loopholes. If you committed any crime, murder, theft, treason, anything, and managed to reach a church, you were untouchable. The king's men literally couldn't arrest you on holy ground. This wasn't some informal tradition. This was written law. In England, once you claimed sanctuary, you had 40 days of total immunity. The sheriff could surround the church, but he couldn't come in. You were fed by the church. You slept by the altar. You were legally speaking temporarily above the law. Westminster Abbey and Durham Cathedral even had special sanctuary knockers. Grab the knocker, you're under protection. We still have these knockers today. Massive bronze rings shaped like monsters' heads. The message was clear. Once you grab this, you're in God's jurisdiction, not the king's. But here's where it gets absurd. After your 40 days, you had two choices: surrender for trial or abjure the realm, confess your crime and go into permanent exile. If you chose exile, you'd walk to the nearest port barefoot, carrying a wooden cross, wearing only a rough tunic. Anyone could rob or beat you on the journey, but killing you was murder. Miss your ship? Execution. Come back to England? Execution. The system was ripe for abuse. In 1378, Robert Hawley murdered someone, claimed sanctuary at Westminster, then kept sneaking out at night to commit more crimes, running back to the church before dawn. He did this for weeks until soldiers finally dragged him out and killed him on the altar steps, which caused such scandal that the soldiers themselves had to claim sanctuary elsewhere. Political refugees really exploited this. During the Wars of the Roses, entire noble families would live in sanctuary for years. Elizabeth Woodville, Queen of England, gave birth to the future King Edward V while in sanctuary at Westminster. Imagine, the heir to throne, born in legal limbo because his mother was technically a fugitive. Some criminals became sanctuary professionals. John of Beverley claimed sanctuary 17 times between 1460 and 1478, each time for different murders. He'd kill someone, run to church, abjure the realm, sneak back into England, kill again, claim sanctuary again. The courts were legally powerless to stop this cycle. Churches near prisons became refugee headquarters. Newgate Prison in London was so close to St Sepulchre's Church that escaped prisoners could reach sanctuary in under 30 seconds. The church eventually had to post guards to turn away minor criminals because they were overwhelmed. By the late medieval period, certain churches had permanent sanctuary rights with no time limit. Durham Cathedral had dozens of permanent fugitives living in a special sanctuary dormitory. They had their own economy, their own hierarchy. Murderers and thieves just living in a cathedral, legally. The Assize of Bread, the Baker's Dozen Law. In 1266, England passed a law that specified down to the ounce exactly how much a loaf of bread should weigh, based on current wheat prices. Not approximately, exactly. With mathematical formulas, the assize of bread and ale included tables like this. When a quarter of wheat is sold for 12 pence, then a farthing white loaf shall weigh 5 pounds and 16 shillings. Pages and pages of precise calculations. If wheat costs X, bread must weigh Y. Every town had to appoint official bread weighers. These were real government positions. Your job was to go around with scales weighing loaves. Find one that's an ounce short, the baker gets fined. Second offence? The pillory. Third offence? Banishment from the trade. The pillory punishment was specifically designed for bakers. You'd be locked in the stocks with your underweight loaves tied around your neck, or worse, dragged through town on a hurdle, a wooden sledge, with the bad bread hanging off you while people threw rotten vegetables. This law created such paranoia among bakers that they invented the baker's dozen, giving 13 items when someone ordered 12. Not as customer service, but as legal protection. Better to give away free bread than risk your calculations being slightly off and facing the pillory. We have court records of these prosecutions. In 1310, London baker John Brid was pilloried for selling underweight bread. In 1327, John de Stratford was banished from baking for life after his third offence. Actual career-ending legal consequences for loaves that were a few ounces light. The law spawned an entire surveillance bureaucracy, the ale conners who tasted beer for quality, the bread weighers with their scales, the flour inspectors who checked for sawdust or chalk. Medieval England had more food inspectors per capita than the modern FDA. Some bakers tried creative compliance. The law specified weight. They'd make their bread so full of air it was technically the right weight, but mostly hollow. Others added sand or sawdust to hit the weight requirements, which led to more laws about bread purity. The Royal Forest Death Penalty. When William the Conqueror established England's royal forests in 1066, he wasn't creating nature preserves. He was claiming about 1/3 of England as his personal hunting ground. And the penalties for poaching were insane. Kill a deer in a royal forest. Under William, you'd have your eyes gouged out. By the time of Richard I, the punishment had evolved. Blind the poacher and cut off his testicles for killing one deer. But here's the insane part. Forest didn't mean what you think. Entire villages could be inside a forest. Your farm that you'd worked for generations could suddenly be forest land, and forest law superseded common law. Living in a forest meant bizarre restrictions. You couldn't cut branches for firewood without permission. Your dogs had to be lawed. 3 claws removed from each front paw so they couldn't chase deer. You couldn't carry a bow, even for protection. You couldn't let your pigs eat acorns during certain months. The deer needed them. You couldn't expand your house or clear new land. The forests had their own courts, their own officials, their own legal system. Forest wardens could enter your home without cause. Forest courts could fine entire villages for one unknown poacher. The foresters were judge, jury, and sometimes executioner. Here's a real case from 1209. A man named William found a dead deer in Sherwood Forest. Not killed it, found it already dead. He took it home to feed his family. The forest court fined him £12, about 10 years' wages for a peasant. When he couldn't pay, they seized everything he owned and outlawed him. The system was so hated that it sparked constant rebellion. The legendary Robin Hood? He was basically fantasy fulfillment for people living under forest law. Every deer he poached was a middle finger to the system. By 1217, the barons forced King John to sign the Charter of the Forest alongside Magna Carta. It's less famous but arguably more important for common people. It rolled back the worst forest law abuses, though it took centuries for the system to fully die. The Paris pig ban. After Prince Philippe's death by pig in 1131, Paris didn't just ban loose pigs, they turned pig control into an art form. The official executioner became the city's chief pig killer. See a pig in the street? The executioner could kill it on sight and keep the head as payment. This was considered a perk of the job. Between human executions, you got free bacon. But pigs were valuable. Poor families kept them as insurance policies, feed them scraps all year, eat them in winter. So Parisians got creative. They'd train their pigs to run home at the sound of specific whistles. They'd disguise pigs as dogs with costumes. Some painted their pigs with religious symbols, hoping superstitious executioners wouldn't kill a holy pig. The monks of St. Anthony got an exception. Their pigs could roam free if they wore bells. These Tantony pigs became a common sight, wandering Paris with bells jingling. Of course, everyone started putting bells on their illegal pigs and claiming they belonged to St. Anthony's. The monks had to start branding their pigs to prove ownership. The law created a black market in suburban pigs. People would keep pigs just outside city limits and smuggle the meat in. Pig laundering became a real crime, taking illegal urban pork and claiming it came from legal rural pigs. Impotence trials. In medieval France, if a wife accused her husband of impotence, the church court could order him to prove his virility, in public, with witnesses. These weren't quick examinations. First came the inspection. A panel of matrons and physicians would manually examine the man's genitals, checking for proper formation, appropriate size, and capability of erection. They'd write detailed reports with measurements. If the inspection was inconclusive, the court might order cohabitation trials. The couple would be locked in a room together for multiple nights, while court officials waited outside, listening for evidence of consummation. Some courts required the couple to attempt intercourse a specific number of times, usually 40 for religious significance. Still not convinced? Time for trial by Congress. The man had to successfully have intercourse with his wife while court-appointed witnesses watched. Usually matrons and church officials sitting around the bed, observing and taking notes. We have records of these trials. In 1426, a man named Jean Carré underwent trial by Congress in Paris. The court report describes, in excruciating detail, his failed attempts over several hours while 7 witnesses observed. His marriage was annulled. The trials became public entertainment. By the 1500s, Parisian gossip sheets reported on famous impotence cases. Crowds would gather outside the courthouse for verdicts. It was reality TV, medieval style. Some men hired assistants, physicians who'd provide various potions and treatments before the trial. Others practiced with prostitutes, trying to build stamina for performance under pressure. The fact that anyone could perform under these conditions seems miraculous. Jus prime noctis, the myth that became law. Here's the wildest part of medieval law. Sometimes the laws that never existed had more impact than real ones. Jus prime noctis, the Lord's right of first night with virgin brides, almost certainly never existed as actual law. We have 0 medieval documents granting this right. No court records of it being exercised, no contemporary complaints about it, but people believed it existed, which made it real in practice. Some lords probably did rape peasant women and claim ancient privilege. Some peasants probably paid bribes to prevent supposed first-night rights. The myth became so powerful that by the 1500s, some regions were formally abolishing this ancient custom that never existed. The legend grew from misunderstanding real medieval customs. Lords could charge fees for peasant marriages, merchi. In some places, newlyweds couldn't consummate for 3 nights without the church's blessing, which cost money. Combine these fees with general feudal abuse, and you get the first night myth. But here's the fascinating part. The myth influenced real law. In 1486, Ferdinand II of Aragon formally abolished the evil custom in Catalonia. In 1520, Zurich abolished it. They were abolishing something that probably never existed, but the act of abolition made people believe it had been real. Looking at these 10 laws, you see medieval Europe's chaotic legal reality. Every kingdom, duchy, city and church had different laws. What was legal in London might be death penalty in Paris. What the church allowed, the king might forbid. What tradition demanded, economics made impossible. Medieval people navigated dozens of overlapping, contradicting legal systems. Royal law, church law, forest law, merchant law, manorial law, all claiming authority, all threatening punishment, none agreeing on anything. The real insanity wasn't any single weird law. It was trying to live when binding a rooster for witchcraft made perfect legal sense, but playing football could ruin your life. When your shoes could be criminal, but murdering someone was fine if you reached a church fast enough. These weren't primitive people lacking sophistication. They were drowning in too much law, too many authorities, too many competing worldviews crammed into a legal system that couldn't handle the contradictions. The medieval period ended not when people became more civilized, but when they finally admitted most of their laws were insane. The Reformation, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment. They were really just movements to throw out the accumulated legal madness of 1,000 years. Next time you complain about bureaucracy or legal complexity, remember, at least your pig can't be tried for murder, your shoes aren't regulated by royal decree, and if you play football on Sunday, the worst you'll face is a noise complaint, not the king's dungeon. Medieval law wasn't just different from ours, it was a complete alternate reality where legal logic went to die. And somehow, society survived it for 1,000 years. That's the real miracle of medieval Europe, not the cathedrals or the knights or the crusades. It's that anyone managed to get through a single day without accidentally committing a capital offence.